It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
Hey guys, how's it going? And welcome to the MSD on 117.8. It's Tuesday, June 25th, and so happy for you joining us, and we are ready to start this day together with the Lord. So subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on SoundCloud, and make sure to support us on Patreon. So today we have an exciting podcast for you with Bible Today and 2G Talks. So how's everyone doing all across the world? And I recognize, right, we said last time that we have over 13 different countries where people are listening to us, right? So depending on what part of the world you're in, it may be summer right now, or I guess it may be winter, really depending on where you are. And I think that's so fascinating, right? Because that might be something that we learn in school. But I think, in places like Providence where we run together on a global scale, that's really the only time that you get to see this, right? So I remember like having meetings back in the past with members from like Australia, and like, while we are wearing summer clothes, they're wearing like winter clothes. Or when we're wearing winter clothes, they're wearing summer clothes. And like seeing that kind of stuff, it was like really, really interesting, right? Like when you're wearing like a thick winter jacket, but you see someone on the other side of the world like wearing a tank top. And so I really hope that all across the world, for everyone listening, that, wherever we are and whatever scenario that we're in, that we can be excited and run together, taking the word for this week and seeing the things that are happening today, right? In the Bible that's being written today, in the history that's being made today, and in the respective places that we may be in. Yeah, so with that, I hope that everyone's very excited, right? And that, with this, we have a couple announcements, right? Like, don't forget that we have Q&A Thursday every week. So if you have questions, get those ready and send them to Peace Sky when you can. And if you haven't yet, leave likes and comments to build our community. I'm really, really thankful for those who've been commenting these last few weeks. And I was really moved too, right? Like some voices whom I haven't heard from before, like last week, so there was a person very grateful for our comment about Father's Day, and also for like the stories that's of something that we've been sharing, right? Like Peace Guy mentioned too that people are lobbying, right, for more and more something stories to be shared, and I really do think that that's important too. Like I don't know for each person, like the various kinds of experiences that you've had, even related to something stories, but I think that they're really key. Because I remember like a couple years ago when I was doing like lecture training for like the first time, like in a really serious way. Like we were using various things from science and various tools to kind of connect it to the word. But like I kept wondering like how to really connect this to something in his life and to like to something directly, right? So that was always something that I had trouble with, like in the very beginning. And like thinking back on it now, like I see that everything God did from that time until now, right? To like teach me something stories like in a deep way, right? Like some of these stories I've heard like a lot growing up, but in the recent few years, like I heard like the details of it, right? I heard like firsthand accounts, and I heard like people tell me things about these stories that I really didn't know. So really, thank you to Chelsea and for others who are pitching for more and more stories to be featured on on the MSC 117.8. And I think that if you yourself know something stories, maybe share them. Like I'm willing to listen to them from you, like if you really think that this is something that well. And honestly, even if you don't know, like if you think there's a particular story that's interesting, or maybe if there's like one of something stories that's featured in the message and the backstory, maybe feel free to share it with us too, because I think that really we're setting the foundation for the upcoming 1,000 years, right? The only reason why we have the Bible written from Jesus's time is because the people who were there at the time wrote it down, right, and conveyed it to each other, and that we have all of the words of Jesus from that time too. So I think what we're doing today and conveying these stories is really important, and I really hope that we can continue to do this for each other too. Yes, so two titles from this Sunday message, right? One was that God has been giving us everything he needed to give us at each time and fulfilling all of the will. And the second title was that you will connect only if you know and you will open your eyes only if you take action. So very deep message, and I really really like this week's message, and I hope that other people, you may have had various realizations, and kind of like directly as the title goes, I do think that God really gave me things directly to understand this message. Like he really prepared me to listen to this week's message, and I think like when I share some of the stories, it'll be shocking, right? Like looking back on it, like after some of these things happened this previous week, I don't even know how I went through it at the time, right? It was crazy, right? But and the crazier thing is, like, I think that this story is crazy, but like when I think about, our history today and everything that Sunny went through and everything that, Jesus has gone through and everything that honestly many of you guys have gone through too, right? And that we as like all the Providence have gone through. It's really like not even that crazy, which is like shocking. Right, so I'll get into some of the things that happened previously this week too, but I think related to that, right? Like one of the things that God said in the message was that He's given us thousands of things, right? Like He's given us grace thousands of time, but we have to learn to recognize it. And I think this process is, it makes so much sense. And I think for those of us who are here in 2024, we're really in a blessed time because we went through, many things up until, last year, leading up till today, and we're in a place where we're kind of like forced to do this, right? If you don't do this, you will it's either sink or swim, right? You're either gonna have to learn how to swim and learn how to do these things, learn how to recognize the grace that God is giving, or you're gonna fail and you're gonna drown and you're gonna die. Right, so that might sound like, I don't know, maybe harsh, maybe dramatic, maybe traumatic, but I think it's really true, right? Because God gives us things in so many ways, right? But are we going to be people who recognize it? And one of the things that it said in the message is that God accompanies us through everything, but like sometimes it comes to the form of difficulties, right? And Pastor Sky shared something like yesterday, like related to like when he was with German members and with his car accident, right? They avoided this 10-12 car pileup. And even with something too, when he started building the Ambition masterpiece, like at the time, like he thought that they were just doing it there because that's the only place that they could do it, right? And he was maybe even disappointed, right? He expressed those things at the time, like expressed what he felt at the time. And I think through each of these examples, right, and Warmingdong being the great example because it represents Providence history in each of us, yes, we face, disappointments and we face these different things. But I really believe that if you are here today, and if you're listening to this podcast today, or maybe you haven't even thought about it, but through this message and through what we are doing today, we become people who recognize that God works even during times of tribulations. And sometimes He works through said tribulations, right? To help us to avoid a greater calamity or to gain something that we otherwise wouldn't if we don't go through this momentary, suffering. Right, so like when I was like sharing with a newcomer today, I was sharing the part about where Jesus says that to come to Him because His yoke is light and His burden is easy, right? Or His yoke is easy, His burden is light, one or the other. But there's a couple things that you may take away from that. I don't know for you guys when you hear that line from Scripture, what Jesus said, what it makes you think of. But over the last few years, it makes me think that the things that we go through for this history and for this life and this relationship with God, um, sometimes we go through and we take steps that we may not want to do, right? And for some of us, that may have even been just coming to faith itself and coming to God and coming to Providence. But we see when we walk that path, that seemingly doesn't seem like the path that we want to go on. Actually, well, oftentimes it's much lighter, right? The burden, the thing that we're experiencing or facing, is much easier than we thought it was. And or right, like when we go through the thing like that, we're kind of like maybe avoiding that burden, that responsibility. Like when we go through it, we attain the thing that we truly wanted. And had we gone any other way, we probably would not have attained in that way, or we would miss a tremendous opportunity. So God is like taking us to this place where we need to receive the thing that we wanted, right? And so I think that's something that we see with all of the central figures in the Bible, and that's something happening today with everything that we go through. And it's also something that we've seen, in Providence with Wonmyeongdong and with everything that Sunseim has done too. So yes, so with that, I'll share one of the stories that happened this week. But before that, we'll go into the first break from today. So I'm really grateful that also someone called out how we were sharing, the different songs from the Sunday service, and that we're trying to understand some of these songs more deeper too. Right? I remember Pastor Sky shared last week how he one of the things he would like to do is kind of like make praise maybe more appropriate, right, for the respective audiences that we have, and kind of make it more open to newcomers. And I think I definitely understand that heart too, and I think it's true, right? We can take some liberties, right? And like even something too, he tells us to do it according to our situation, right? But one of the things that I actually really hope, and I know that everyone feels this way, and I think that this is something that we should think of too. But like as was mentioned, right, when we think about the new songs, right, given by the Trinity, where the Holy Spirit provided the lyrics and the melody, and they use something as a singer, right? These are the songs that will last for the 1,000 years, right? So like even in the early days of Providence, we used to sing a lot more hymns, right? A lot of like hymns that are like preserved in the Bible. And I think that's the shocking part, right? Because like now that they've given us a direction that these songs that the Trinity gave that like represent the things that they fulfilled in this time period, it totally makes sense that 1,000 years in the future or 100 years in the future, even in this next generation, the next 30, 40 years, that these are the songs that people will sing, right? Like if you think about hymns in the Bible, people don't necessarily sing those all the time, but they are the songs that were preserved, right? And they help us trace back, our story and our lineage back to that point. And so, like for me, I don't know at what point it was, but like I for a while, I used to like some songs in the world too. But nowadays, I don't really listen to a lot of worldly songs. Sometimes I do, but I think because we're in Providence, like I can't help but have the lens of like looking at these lyrics and looking at the beat and like looking at like the way the song was composed, and even looking at the singer, right? And like wondering like what does this song mean, right? Like is this song even that really that good? Like what is the song like actually really talking about? And when I do that kind of analysis, and when I like really press down on the songs that I listen to, like I don't know, I get sick of listening to the songs rather quickly. And it's not to say that you guys have to really do that, and I hope that you don't. If there are songs that you listen to that you enjoy and that aren't really that harmful. But I really say this to say that I hope that people in Providence can become really good singers that sing like that really get good at singing some singing songs, right? Because I think that each of us have seen that example. Because like yeah, like it's easy to say that it's difficult to sing some singing songs, right? That sounds like a mouthful. It's easy to say that it's difficult to sing some singing songs and the new songs, but I have seen people put in a lot of work to sing these songs really well. And when someone practices this song really well, of course you're good at singing like other songs and songs in the world and like what's trendy and what's in. But when people put in this effort to sing this song well and to learn it, then it actually sounds like really good. And not just that, we know that there's a deeper significance to these songs, and these are the songs that will last for 1,000 years. And so, I really hope that people can become good singers, that that sing, not just what's in or what's hip and what's in 2024, but will sing the songs that will last in the generations to come. So with that, we'll enter into the first break for today. And the song that we sang, and I really appreciated what the praise leader did by picking these songs. The first song that we sang was Everything That God Has Given Us. Right. So, this song, right, in part of the lyrics, it talks about all he's given us, like all shapes and forms. And I don't know what you guys think of, but the first story that I'm going to be sharing about today are maybe um, some of the unpleasant things that we face, which in turn actually either is something that God wants to give us, or through that experience, we get to see what God has given us and that God is accompanying us, right? So, in all shapes and forms, yes, there's so many pleasant things, so many great things, so many joyful and hopeful things. And there's also like difficulties and challenges and things that we experience that help us to see the Trinity on a deeper level. So, yes, all shapes and forms, right? That's what the song says. And so I hope that everyone can enjoy and listen and go into the first break for today.
Everything God has prepared, all He's given us. Just like the Spirit, they are the most beautiful. Valuable gifts from God, treasures truly rare. Let us give thanks, offering glory to our God. All He has given is marvelous, all shapes and forms. Stories of old been done for us, they're truly deep. My heart is full, overwhelmed by the love of the Trinity. And with these awesome stories, let's rejoice now and live in love. Everything God has prepared, all He's given us. Just like the Spirit, they are the most beautiful. Valuable gifts from God, treasures truly rare. Let us give thanks, offering glory to our God. All He has given is marvelous, all shapes and forms. Stories of all that's been done for us, they're truly deep. My heart is full, overwhelmed by the love of the Trinity. And with these awesome stories, let's rejoice now and live in love. Let us give thanks, offering glory to our God. All He has given is marvelous, all shapes and forms. Stories of all that's been done for us, they're truly deep. My heart is full, overwhelmed by the love of the Trinity. And with these awesome stories, let's rejoice now and live in love. And with these awesome stories, let's rejoice now and live in love. And with these awesome stories, let's rejoice now and live in love.
Yes, so that was everything that God has given us. I hope you guys enjoyed that. And, like as we're playing more and more of these praise songs too, I'm sure like sometimes like during the breaks in the past, like when it's like different kind of music from like different sources and not necessarily like praise songs, you may bop and you may love it and you may like it and you may really take the breaks too. But I'm sure that as we like use praise songs too, that there may be some of you guys who sing along to it or hum to it or at least like, go through the songs in your head. And so with it, I hope that everyone can think about, like, the things that God has given to each of them through these songs. Yes, so we'll go into our first topic for today with Bible Today, right? The things that are happening, all across Providence, and connecting it to like the past and to the future and these various topics. And I'll be honest, like as we go and as we try to do more and more Bible Today, sometimes, and this may just be because it's pretty early, like we've only been doing this for the last couple of weeks, but it may also be that sometimes like the form of it feels like not set, right? Like some days we're like using scriptures, other days we're using like different things from different parts of the 30 principles, or like with stories of a 선생님, or just with personal realization. It may include all of these things, but actually like it does encompass all those things, right? Because we're living the Bible of today, right? And I think that, just it makes sense, but it's something that I felt over these last few weeks because I've been meeting with more of our newcomers that have been kind of learning for a while. And so I met with two of our newcomers like these last 2, 3 weeks, who I haven't met before. And the lecturers and the managers who typically teach them, they wanted me to, help teach them. And they either wanted me to help teach them or to help like share something with them. And it was kind of vague for me at first, to be honest. I love being able to do that when thinking about, like, oh, like, what do I teach this person? Like, what can I offer from this experience together that, would be different from like the typical lesson that they've been doing? Because, I may just be helping these lecturers save on a lesson plan for that day, but I also was thinking that this is a different opportunity because some of these some of these newcomers have been learning for a while. So how can we, in this different setting than they're typically used to, help them connect with the word to a deeper level? And so because of that mindset, we didn't really do like a typical lesson from start to finish. With one of them, I shared this, I think last week, about central figures, and that was a really great time. But today we got to meet with a newcomer, and we were speaking to her, and she had questions after listening to the Sunday message, and it was a really good question. So we'll get into that conversation in a bit. But yes, through this conversation, we really got to live out the Bible of today. Right? We got to talk about it. We got to have these kinds of conversations, and so our dialogue like this, right, even with the MSC 117.8, where we're speaking about the message, going over the story, sharing each other's stories, and then engaging with each other in the comments. That's all part of, right, this process of figuring out the word and of putting it into practice. So that was all part of that. And so I kind of want to share a story, as you mentioned, about really all of the things that God gives us. And we have to recognize this too, because I think depending on whether we recognize it or not, we become people who accept the grace, or we become people who react to it negatively. And I remember like praying about this with God the other day, because I'll be honest, I think in the last year and a half or so, there were so many times where I prayed to God, saying like, God, if this isn't my will, then allow things to go differently. Right? Like I said, I prayed this in so many different forms, but that's a prayer that I prayed a lot. But the funny thing was that those prayers came true. Right? Like I would want things to happen this way, but I would always pray, God, if this isn't your will, then allow things to happen a different way, or allow things to work out according to your will. And things would always play out differently than I expected it to. But what that meant, though, at times, is that I had to go through a lot of discomfort, right? Because I had to deal with things that I didn't necessarily want to deal with. But at that time, like when I went through it, and like, that would also mean that there would be suffering involved. But the end result was always God answering, at the core, at the heart, what it is that I truly needed and wanted. So that's a prayer that I've been having for the last year and a half. But I remember like 2 weeks ago, I had something similar to this happen. And so after this, like kind of this negative thing happened, I remember praying to God. I was like, God, okay, I still stand by that prayer. And if things aren't according to your will, then please change the scenario, and please change how things happen. And I still stand by that. But I told God, but I was like, God, okay, if possible though, I would love to know what your will is, and I would like to act according to it so that I don't have to go through so much suffering. Right? Like I love the outcome, but like all of this discomfort sometimes it's hard. Right. And so I'm sure God will answer that prayer in different ways. But of course, it won't mean that all the discomfort will go away. So there was something that happened like this previous week, right? So as you guys may have known, and as I may have shared, I've been translating parts of the Peace Soccer book that something wrote, right? And I've been sharing the different parts of it with different members. And of course, we have to use it responsibly. And after I'm finished, I already talked to the person who's part of the kind of the English publication department. Yeah, and we've all discussed that this isn't an official translation, right? This is kind of just like a sharing, and once I'm finished, it's gonna need some review and an editor to go over things and to work with it. But for the time being, I love sharing it, and AP has the soccer tournament coming up in about 2 months time, and so I love sharing it with members so that in one other way, by sharing the word, we have something to improve on, and to make up our daily habits, like through the lens of this word about soccer. So I was been translating these things. So last week I was like, okay, I also want to practice and to play soccer too. Right, so I remember like even P Sky, one of the things he used to do in the past when he was playing, practicing and trying to improve for soccer, is he would go play pickup games, right, in his local neighborhood and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, let me do that. So I'm on some Facebook groups where people play pickup soccer, and like while I was translating, I saw a post from some guy saying that they're putting on a game on Thursday. And so I was like, okay, you know what? This is the opportunity. Let's just do it. Let's just sign up for this game. And so I messaged the guy and I said, hey, like, do you guys have room? And so, by talking back and forth, I signed up to play a game on Thursday. And it turned out like this guy didn't put a location on the initial post. So I knew it was like in the greater San Francisco Bay Area, but I didn't know exactly what city. So San Francisco Bay Area, from like the furthest end to the other furthest end, I would say maybe it's about 2 hours, right? From east to west. Like if you go from all the way to the eastmost point in like the inland part of the Bay Area to the westmost point in San Francisco, maybe will take you around 2 hours. So it could be anywhere in that range, right? So he told me that he's based in San Francisco. And so I'm across the bridge in East Bay, and that's more inland, and so it's about maybe half an hour to an hour away from San Francisco. And so I don't really like going into the city if I don't have to, but because I was like, I made up my mind to go play soccer, right, and to like put this word into practice, to improve my skills, and also to become the living embodiment of this word. So I was like, you know what, whatever, I'll just do it, I'll go. So I signed up, and I had to pay too, right? Because San Francisco doesn't have a lot of open fields, so they have to pay to reserve like an actual soccer field. So I was like, you know what, whatever, this is my sign to go. And so I paid, and I signed up for this time. But because the game happens like after people's like typical working hours, it was at like 5 p.m. Right, and I did not want to go into the city at that time, so I was like, okay, what do I do early on in the city to spend the day to prepare for this soccer game? Right? And I have some friends who live in the city, and yeah, we like hardly go visit them because no one likes driving into like San Francisco, the city. Right? It's like any other metropolitan city. Like people don't really love driving there. So I was like, you know what? I never go visit these friends, and especially over this like last year and a half after being in Hawaii and different parts of the world, I haven't really seen these people. But with each and every person, I want to give them the word, and I want to, whether it's over a long period of time or just periodically, like give them and like sow seeds, right, so that they can grow. So I was like, and I don't know who God wants me to talk to, so I invited like two friends, and I say, hey, like are you guys free that day? And initially they weren't for dinner after the soccer game, but they said they were free for lunch. So I was like, okay, perfect, let's go meet each other for lunch. So even that morning, I worked on some of the Peace Soccer book, and I was like so fired up, and I was like, like this is so great. Like, I'm gonna put this word into practice. I made up my mind. I drove to San Francisco, and like I hit traffic, but then, I was like determined to like testify to my friends, to go play soccer, and to do these different kind of things. Right. And when I got to the city, I parked in front of my friend's place, and we were gonna go walk over to the restaurant to meet, one of our other friends. And like like in that part of San Francisco, it's kind of like the parts of San Francisco that you see on the news. It's not the greatest place. Like it's called a Tenderloin, and it's like it has a lot of homeless people, and it has a lot of color. And it's like if you weren't from the area, you wouldn't feel that great about it, right? There's a lot of homeless people. There's a lot of crackheads. There's a lot of people doing drugs, and but it also means that it's very vibrant, and there's a lot of businesses, a lot of like small boutique shops and restaurants and stuff. So there's a lot to do, right? It's very colorful, very bright, very vibrant. But when we were there, we were walking by, and the sidewalk that we were walking on, it's kind of a typical city sidewalk, so it's not very wide. It's not like super narrow, but it maybe has like the space for like two people to walk comfortably in one direction or one place. And I remember as we were walking, I was like telling my friend, like, because he asked me what I was up to, and I told him, "Oh, I'm playing soccer later today because I've been wanting to play more and improve, and I've been working on translating the soccer book, and I've been learning a lot from it, and I was like so moved, and I want to do this." So I was like talking to him about these things, and we were walking over to the restaurant, and while we were walking, I see someone walking from the other side, and he was kind of a big guy, and he didn't look very friendly. He was kind of walking with like a uh, like he had kind of like an angry purpose to his step as he's walking forward, right? So I was like, I don't think that this guy is gonna move out of the way. I think he's gonna like walk straight forward. And so I kind of moved slightly over so that he would have walking space. But not only did he not walk forward, he walked like directly into me. Right. And like I said, like, I moved out of the way a little bit. So he purposely angrily like walked into me. Right. But because in my headspace, like I was like, you know what? I came here to testify about the word and to play soccer, and like listening to something's word really made me like not concerned about the obstacles, but I was like so focused on like living this life of providence and of peace soccer. And honestly, truth be told, there's like much worse things that have happened to me than someone bumping into me, right? Even on purpose, right? So I was like, dude, there's nothing that this person can do to me that's gonna make me like upset by this behavior. And so I turned around to excuse myself, right? Even though he's the one that purposely bumped into me. So I turned around and I said, "Excuse me." And the guy, he was upset. He was angry, right? So he was angry. He's like, "Watch where you're going." And in his hand, he had like this plate. He had this like takeout container of food, and it was like Indian food, right? It had a lot of sauce. And so he took that food and he threw it at my back, right? And it hit me like square on the back, right? And like I think like people were watching and they were like all shocked, right? So they're all shocked, and my friend is shocked, and my friend is like, "Dude, like, what's your problem?" And like I think I remember like looking at the guy and be like, whatever, and we just kept going. And my friend was like, "Hey, do you want to go back and like wash this off?" He felt so bad, but like both in that moment and like for the rest of the time, I was like completely like unfazed at all, right? Just like zero reaction. And I think like some like in if that were to happen in some other scenarios, maybe I would just be like, "Oh no, it's okay," but like inside I may be actually feeling kind of like, "My gosh, like this sucks, like why did this happen," sort of thing. But like really like through the whole time, like I didn't feel anything. I was like completely fine. Right. Of course I went when we got to the restaurant, like I went inside and I washed it off. My friend said, "Hey, like later afterwards you can come over to my place and I'll wash it for you." And like looking back on it, it's crazy too, because God even prepared what I would wear in that scenario, right? Because I'm going to play soccer, right? So for the first time, I wore like clothes that I would maybe go out to play soccer in, and so these are clothes that I typically don't really wear. So I wasn't really wearing anything that I cared about so much, right? I was wearing this. It was funny, right? I was wearing a white jacket, right? It was like completely white, but it wasn't really a jacket that I had been wearing over the last few years. So it's a pretty old jacket, and but it was like easy to exercise in. And it was a material, like it wasn't made of cotton and stuff, and it was kind of made of like a polyester kind of material. So it did kind of get on the jacket, but it didn't stain as heavily as if I was wearing like some like cotton like hoodie or something like that. And so when we went to wash it later, it completely washed out. And not just that, like I was thinking, because I'm in the city, right? And so typically when I go out to the city, I don't wear like slippers or something like that, and I wear sneakers because it may involve a lot of walking. But that day, like I didn't feel like wearing sneakers, and so I decided to wear Crocs, right? I decided to wear like slip-on slippers. And so when when the food like hit my back and got on my jacket and on my shoes, which were the only two places it got on a jacket that I didn't really care about, which washed out completely when we went to my friend's place to wash it, and like Croc slippers that even though the food did get on it, all I had to do was like wipe it off and wash it off, and it came off. So even like the physical things God prepared, and like all of like in that moment, the things that happened, like for one, I know that the only reason why I had like zero reaction and I was like completely cool with everything was because of everything that, God had me experience and go through in these last few years. Right? I know how much suffering that, God has gone through. I know how much suffering that, that Jesus went through, and how much suffering that Sunzane went through, and how much suffering that, each of you guys may have gone through too. Right? So like when this story about like getting hit in the back with food, comes out, it may seem kind of shocking, and it was shocking. And like when I went back home later, like it made me reflect on. I was like, whoa, like that really happened. But like truth be told, I was very grateful to God, because like one of the things that something said, like when he had to live his life of prayer in, and he had to go all the way to Daejeonsan from Warmyeongdong, was that he realized that God doesn't just protect the people that he loves, but he raises them and he trains them to be strong. And so, we can choose to look at the suffering in our lives. We can choose to look at the yoke and the burden and complain. And we can choose to not recognize even these experiences that we have. But I believe that everyone that who's made it to this point, and the example that 선생님 has set, what Wonmyeongdong is and what the ambition masterpiece is by collapsing and being built up again, is that we are people who are able to recognize the grace that God is giving us, even the hardships. And of course, like, sometimes hardships may not beget blessing, but even amid tribulations, as the last few weeks' message have said, we can find the blessing. And if we are people who open our eyes, even during times of tribulation, then we can be people who tie those things down with ropes or with chains so that when the tribulation passes by, we have something remaining. Because otherwise, people in the world, when they go through difficulties, if they aren't able to capture and do this, they won't receive those blessings. And then they'll just go through meaningless suffering, and they won't recognize the things that are happening in their life. And also, additional thing with people in the world is like they won't know how they're contributing to their own suffering. Right? Because we all do that. We've done that too. Like before we came to Providence, or even after we came to Providence, if we couldn't see what God was doing and we walked in the opposite direction, which I have done many times, especially over the last few years, which is what led me to pray to God, like, God, please make it so that I don't go through some sort of suffering, like all the time. Like maybe a couple times is okay, but please don't make it so that I go through suffering all the time in order to learn your will. But even connecting to that prayer and to the beginning of this topic and to all the graces that God has given us, like I think that this example, with this food and with this being hit in the back, it was a time that in the past I would have been like what the heck, like what happened for this? And it probably would have been worse if I didn't have in mind like of wanting to take action that day, whether it was like playing soccer or like whether it was going out to testify and to preach and to try to evangelize. If I didn't have that on mind, I wouldn't be able to see it, right? And so he said, like even in the message this week, it said that like you won't know it when God accompanied us through our hardships and our thoughts, right? If we don't recognize the graces that God has given. But I think after this most recent prayer, where I was like, God, like please help me to see it, please help me to do what needs to be done. I think this was an example of doing what God wanted me to do, even in that moment. And this only happened through experience, through training, through past times where I couldn't see it, through this experience. And so I'm really grateful to God that He answered this in this way. And I hope that, all of us can become said people. And that, like if you've already experienced something like this, then please, feel free to let us know and write in the comments below. Or to reach out to me too and reach out to Pastor Sky to recount the story. But I really hope that we become people who are made in the Lord's image and who are made in God's image in this way too. Right. So I think, one of the other things from this week's message, God says that, He takes action without stopping. And one of the things that Pastor Scott shared yesterday is that, yeah, like even in the former faith, right, if people don't recognize, God can't just stop history because of those people, right? Because there are 8 point something billion people in the world who are living in this time period that God has to answer all the prayers for. And I think we've really seen this, that where God takes action without stopping. And I believe that those remaining today and those remaining to the end are those, who are able to recognize what God did, and that we are people who don't look at what people do, right? And if we could have been like, up until last year, maybe even up until today, we could have been people who looked at other people. But I think this was a test for us to see, like, oh, are you someone who understands the lesson of central figures? Are you someone who understands that God makes history through one person? That we need to look at that person's story, their life, their example, and become like that person, because otherwise we will fall away. Otherwise, if we go out and something happens to us, we will blame and fault God. Otherwise, we'll say like, "Oh, why does God do this? Why does something do this? Why does, something appoint people who are like this?" And I've heard many of those things before, and I've probably felt those things too. But we can also be people who, even though, we get food thrown at our backs, even though there's conflict and tumultuous things that happen in this life of faith, we become people who are make ourselves like the central figures, right? No one in the Bible had their life easy, right? No one who like became a great figure, right? And that's the central figure lesson, right? Joseph was sold into slavery, right? He had to build himself up. He was falsely accused by his brothers, by the captain of the guard's wife, right? But he made himself. Right? Moses, he was chased out of his own country, lived 40 years in Midian, and he had to go through something, and he had to lead a people who, turned their back on him at every given opportunity. And Jesus too, he was born a carpenter's son. And people didn't recognize him. The people who waited for him didn't recognize him. And something too, he wasn't born from a great family. He wasn't born of an established place. He was born in the countryside in a remote mountain village in Korea, which at the time was a poor and small country that no one recognized. And for each of us too, right? Whatever our start may be, whatever our positions may be, when we started our life of faith, we were all small, right? We may still think that we're small. But actually, if you made it to this point, you're probably pretty big. Yes, but we may have started from a small place. But because we went through this, you have become big. Because God has sown in you and you have grown in this way, you are big. All of the things that God has given you, all shapes and forms, both the good and the bad, those are the thousands of different kinds of grace that God has given you, and we must be able to recognize that. We have to be able to recognize that. Otherwise, we are people who are not grateful, right? We are people who fail to know, right? So when we fail to know, we can't receive the grace, and there's no thanksgiving, and there's no action. Right, so I really hope that all of us become people who recognize this, that we help each other to see it, that we continue to write the Bible of today in our actions and our thoughts and in our writing and in our communications, both with the Trinity, with our prayers, and with our conversations with other members, and that we can continue to foster and make these connections. Right, and so like with the title Connections with Thought Connections, the second song and the second break for today before we get into our final segment is the song Connection. And this was, the second song that we sang for our praise this week. And, it goes with the title, right? That you will connect only if you know. It's connection. And I think there may be some folks who like came to Providence after this song was written. Like one of the newcomer that we were teaching today, like she definitely came after the song was written, and we were kind of going over how like this song, the connection song, and you'll hear this, is very upbeat and it's very cheery. But actually, when the poem first came out, like if you guys remember this a couple of years back, when somebody received this poem about our connection with God, how even if we like just connect with God and we brush past, like we can't leave God alone, and this connection has to go for an eternity, right? It was such a deep poem. I was like so moved, right? Like that, like and there's so many different ways to see this, right? And that's a part of poetry and with art, right? That sometimes it'll make you feel a certain way, and there's different things to pull out of it, of course. And like that's like even the idea of parables, right? Of course, there's like the general answer, the general one answer, but there's like all of these deep things that are in there, right? So with the connection song, right? One of the things that it made me feel is that sometimes we take for granted the things that connect us to God, right? Like it may really just be like clothing brushing by clothing, right? On the street, we just bump into someone, right? It may just be like skin touching skin, right? Just, I don't know, a handshake here and there, a high five, right? We've given thousands, millions of those within our lifetime. But, right, those are these deep connections with God. Like we sometimes think of our deep connections with God and are tremendous stories, and we don't think of them being that valuable. But something through this poem, he taught us that actually these are the things that make this relationship with God, and these are the things that we must cherish, right? That must make us go and make our relationship with God last for eternity. So that's one of the ways that one of the things that I felt from this poem. Of course, there may be other things and deeper things with connections. And if there's something that you feel or felt from hearing this song or listening to this poem, and if you don't recall this poem or haven't seen this before, I hope that you'll be able to find it. I think it may be on Palm Station and see it and to reflect on it. But anyway, so this is our second break with the song Connection.
Two people may connect just by brushing by. But if skin brushes skin, will they just merely connect? That will make them turn into lovers. If clothing brushes clothes, it could last for 10 years. But if it's skin to skin, 100 years. If it's our hearts that touch that together, we should live for 1,000 years.
Yes, so that was connection. Hope everyone really enjoyed that, and it really reinvigorates us about our connection with God too. As a last bit for that too, and this is kind of related to this the past story I shared in the first segment. Like when I first went through this and I went home that day, like I'll be honest, I'll be honest with two things that I felt. The first thing that I felt at the time was, to be fair, I was kind of disappointed, right? Like, and I wasn't disappointed by what happened with this, but I remember that at the time, after this experience, and then like going to lunch when I was with my friends, I remember testifying for Sunseoknim, and I was like sharing like the different parts of the Peace Soccer book, and I think at least one of these friends have seen the Netflix documentary, and or have at least like they may have talked to like some other friends who have seen it, and they know that I'm a part of Providence, right? So they may have different thoughts, or like if even if they don't know, one of my friends, he's atheist, and he doesn't really have a good relationship with Christians. And so, but I was sharing, and he was like receptive to it, and so was the other guy. And so I think I was kind of hoping for a bigger reaction after like what we went through. But even like when I went home, because I shared like the parts of the Peace Soccer book that had to do with volleyball, because this one friend who's an atheist, he recently started to play volleyball, and so because I was sharing to him all the deep insights that God taught Sunseoknim about life through soccer, I was able to kind of like testify naturally about volleyball and what that section said. And so I sent these two friends like the part that I translated about volleyball. And I will be honest, I do remember feeling disappointed because I was hoping for a bigger reaction. But I think that's just a part of like them living out in the world, and I don't know how those seeds were sown, right? So like that, I'll like in saying all this that was my initial reaction. So I don't know how things will go, and I think we have to continue to take those shots, right? Like the hundreds of shots, right? It's not about the one shot that we took, but it's about did we take those shots until it went in, right? So like there's that. So that was just my initial reaction, but I wanted to be kind of open and transparent, right? So because I think if someone else went through this kind of experience, they too might feel like this way or that way about it. And if they think like, wow, like other people don't go through this kind of disappointment or tragedy, then you may feel alone. But so I'll be very honest, I went through some disappointment with that. But the second thing that happened in part of this process was I messaged our church reps, and because it was actually my church rep who highlighted the part about volleyball and sent it to me earlier that day. Right, because I kind of sent in a longer excerpt from the Peace Soccer book to our church chat room so that members would be able to look at it and to reflect on it. And my church rep sent me back like a couple lines about volleyball. He said like, "Oh, I was so moved by this part." And so because of that, it was like right available on my phone, and I was able to share it easily to the newcomer. So because it happened, like because that was another way that God gave me grace, and that He like planned that, and the Holy Spirit used that so that I could testify. I told my church reps the story, and I like recorded it, and I sent it to them, and I told them like, I could just let this moment pass. And mind you, right, I was also kind of feeling a little bit disappointed at the time, right? So like I was like, I could just let this moment pass, but I feel like if I don't testify about it, then I'm gonna forget it. And so I feel like I should tell this to someone. And then so I told them the story. At first, I was just gonna let the story pass. I didn't tell my family, I didn't tell anyone else. And in one part, I was like, okay, let this be something that I bury for a while. Maybe I'll testify it at some point, but for now, let me just be the only one to go through it. Because I kind of felt like if I knew I couldn't share this with my family, because if I said it, my parents would have been pissed that this kind of thing happened to me. But that's not really the reaction I wanted. Right. So I was like, okay, I feel like I need to share this, but I can't say this to my family. So let me tell it to my church reps. And so even when I shared it that first time, the realizations weren't from this weren't as fluid as like the things that I shared on today's MSD episode. And I think this only came because the word came out, right? It's helping me to think about it from a different lens. But yes, I think that each person should be able to make those connections and should share these stories, right? Otherwise, they do get lost. if we don't testify about it, then we become people who will lose it too. And so that's one of the things that I want to say as this last part about this story and such. But rounding out our episode today with 2G Talks, I'll conclude by sharing something about what Pastor Sky shared yesterday, right? And if you guys follow him on Instagram or on Facebook and such, and you've seen what he shared yesterday, we know that he shared about kind of like being this uncle figure for a lot of SS, and he's played this role for Milky Way too. But as the second gen in Providence start to grow up, of course he plays his role for SS as well. And I think he kind of captures something that many of us may feel when we first interact with SS, in that they're very foreign to us, right? Especially depending on how old you may be, right? And like this, the thing he shared about how like they're interested in like questions about the LGBTQ stuff, because so many more of the kids in their schools are going through things like that. It makes sense, right? And I remember having that conversation with a lot of other SS teachers, because man, yeah, the SS are interested in it, and it's even something that even for me, like people like didn't really talk about that even when I was in high school. And that's like not that long ago. It was kind of like in the background, but it was never like to this degree. And people always just kind of looked at people who suffered from these things with like sympathy, like just like kind of like, oh, that's so unfortunate sort of thing. It was never about like in the front, like acceptance, like everyone is gay sort of thing that we see kind of today. So I definitely understand that. And I think, people can get lost. Like, even if it's not that, like when we look at kids, we're like, oh my gosh, like they're interested in completely different things from me. But one thing that I have to like tip my hat off to Pastor Sky, and not just to him, but like this group of people, of leaders and of people who have helped me to manage other SS in the recent few years, is that the biggest thing that they do, and this is what Pastor Sky did by having these kind of conversations with these kids and talking to them and also listening to them and listening to their questions. And the part about that he mentioned about training them is that we're showing interest in them. We're being vested in them. And that vested interest is so much more important. And I'll say this because like parents and SS teachers, right? These people and like even Pastor Sky and everyone. I remember when like they first started seeing these kids dealing with the LGBTQ stuff, that they were like, wow, we need to have a panel where the kids can ask about this and we can address it. And I remember feeling at the time like, yeah, like the kids do need to know this, but I feel like if they know the word properly, this should be something that isn't that unclear, right? They should kind of know, right? And the answer comes through the word, right? So if they have a good grasp on the word, this shouldn't be that big of an issue. Yes, it is an issue because like the people around them are interested and they're probably surrounded by it all the time. But in the grand scheme of their life, if they know the word clearly, this shouldn't be that big of an issue. But of course, we should handle this with care. Some kids are like way more influenced by this because it's just so much more prevalent in their lives. So, we need to do this with care too. But the part that I really want to emphasize is that in what Pastor Sky was doing, interacting with these S's in this way, and being genuinely vested in their interests and even listening to them, listen, because oftentimes when we deal with newcomers or S's or kids, we want to tell them everything. We want to give them the answers. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of these kids, they've been listening to the word since they were very young. So whether or not they really know the answers have already been given to them. And so we kind of need to let them experience things and to see it. But they also need kind of like a soundboard to kind of bounce off these things, and that's where the role of the adults and the SS teachers and the people in front of them and all of us are. Right? It's the same thing with the newcomer too, right? No newcomer is perfect from the get-go, and they have these questions and they have these things and they have these things that they need to know. And so just as we show vested interest in newcomers, showing vested interest in like the younger folks, whether it be for some of us, the younger people might mean career, it might mean campus, and it might mean SS, and it might mean Milky Way, right? And that was contained in Sons and Names, the Holy Spirit letter that we gave, right? It's one step below you, right, in managing them. And so, yes, having a vested interest in them. And I really do agree with what Pastor Sky shared about training them. Like giving them missions is really good. And I think this is also something about being showing vested interest in them, like training them and using them. And what Pastor Sky mentioned is really true, because if you just toss them to, teach the Milky Way, or to do X mission or Y mission, they may not know. Sure, they may have seen the example, they may have seen other people doing it, but that doesn't mean that they really know how to do it. So there's kind of a three-step process in teaching the SS, in training them, in making them do these things, because I think doing these things is really great. Like some of the things that I think that I got to experience, or that I think are really important for kids to develop the skills on, even from a very young age, was being able to preach and deliver the word. Right, that's really important. And the kids already have experience with that, because they hear a lot of preaching, right? They hear a lot of really great preachers, right, in Providence, and that's a huge skill, right? Because like even in the United States, more people fear death, more people feel public speaking than death, right? But it's kind of like the inverse in Providence, because we hear so much public speaking, right? For me, it was like so easy, right? Because we saw this from a young age. And honestly, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to be good at public speaking. And that doesn't mean that even if you were in Providence for 20 years, you're going to like public speaking. But it makes it that much easier. So I remember one of the things that I did as an SS that they had us do was before the Wednesday services, they would have maybe a couple pages of a summary of the Sunday message. And they started asking the older high school students to share and to go over that summary. And oftentimes it'd be accompanied by the videos that we used to have. And that was a really great time. And I will be honest, there was some pushback to having that segment too, which is why eventually we stopped doing it. And so it doesn't have to take on that form, but I really thought that form was really great, and that experience was great, right? Because that was something that I was exploding to do, and I was so grateful for that opportunity. And it really made us understand. And things were set up for us. We didn't have to extract everything from the Sunday message, and we weren't alone. We didn't have to do this. We were provided the script, and we were told to practice. And when they said there'd be a video, and then we could do this, and we learned by example, right? So that was one thing. Another thing that I really did was praise, and praise is so important too, right? Praise is important for our own faith. And I think praise is something where you can easily kind of input the SS, and you need people who will serve a good example of what a praise leader should be, and can also guide them, and you can also provide education, right? But through this process, right, the three-step process is shown. First things first, they need to see. We need to set the example so that they can see. But that shouldn't be too difficult, because most oftentimes, these kids are going to church, so they see the example anyways. But you can just keep setting the example, whether it's with praise or delivering the word. All of these are things that the kids will see. And when we do things together with them, right, you shouldn't just make them do praise on their own. Right? Maybe they can, but not all of them can, and not all of them should. But if they do praise together with you, or together with someone else who's setting the example, who understands the ins and outs of the mission a lot more, then they have someone who they can directly emulate during that time. So setting an example is one thing. And number two is to teach them formally, right? And this is something said about soccer, right? Yeah, give them, you can call it education if you like. You may have trouble getting them to sit down, but after you've gone to them to the point of doing these missions and gaining this experience, you should teach them the reasons why we should do something, right? What is praise? Why do we praise? What is praise intended to be, right? And how do we do it, right? So that the kids can understand, right? So teaching them formally, right? As formally as we can, when it's apparent that they've come to a place where they're interested, right? In Pastor Sky's example, right? These kids were asking, how do we lecture, right? So they're interested. They've been given this role of teaching the Milky Way, so they're interested. So you teach them. And the third thing is, I think you need to let them experience things from a very early age, right? And that includes a lot of things. Even for me, we started doing, even before praise, we started doing cheer, back when there was cheer, right? And I didn't enjoy it all the time, but it was a place where I could be used in the church and gain that experience. And so it started from special performances on holidays, and man, we were good. I'll be honest with you, our dancing was good at times. So sometimes it wasn't always like the coordinated cheer that we used to have in different parts of Providence, but like we would have a song and we would come up with a dance, and we were good back at the time, even when we were kids. So like even that was something that we learned from. And then from that we started doing praise, and so I started doing praise like even as early as middle school. And that was such a huge thing because, when I started to do choir, even in high school, I was already a pretty good singer, right? Because I started to sing at church. And right, and we started to develop our vocal cords. And when this was a very early time that we got to see people setting condition for their church and for faith, and it was such a huge thing. So yeah, so these kind of things, and this one isn't really a mission. I don't think that you necessarily have to do this in a mission, but this is something that we all need experience with. And it may seem kind of similar to the lecturing thing, but kids need experience praying. Praying is so huge. I don't even think that we need to explain why prayer is huge, but praying for other people, praying out loud in public, that is huge. And kids need experience doing it. And I'm saying this as someone who went through that, right? Like, kids often are embarrassed to pray. Like newcomers are embarrassed to pray, especially to pray out loud. But praying for people and praying on behalf of people, praying in front of a crowd and praying in front of a meeting, that is so important. That happens so many times in Providence. And God answers the prayers that we pray on behalf of other people. And and I see that if people don't develop this quality of praying out loud, and praying on behalf of people from an early age, they don't pick up on it when they get older. Like it takes so much time. And so their prayers will become so much better if they start from an early age. And even that prayer, right? Like, so it doesn't mean that you make the kids do rep prayer or something like that, or opening prayer. I think I did do that a couple times, like as a kid too. But it just means like, yeah, if there's an occasion to pray, you help them to pray. And they may be uncomfortable with it, but they will also have seen, plenty of examples at this time, right? Because, if they have, lived to the time that they're SS, even Milky Way, they've heard many other people pray. So first, yeah, so there's a 3-step process to this too, right? You show them the example. You ask them at times to do it. They may not do it at first, but you give them these experiences from a young age. And after showing them the example and making sure that they see it, you can also help them to understand. You can help them have these kind of conversations. I think the prayer ones maybe a little bit like fuzzier than the praise one. Praise is like kind of a very easy place to start, and so that's something that kids can do, and that I think that even in church people will not complain so much about. People did complain when we had the Sunday message recap on the Wednesdays, and people may complain if kids are doing like rep prayer and opening prayer, but people won't really complain if they're on the praise team, right? And that's just that's my thoughts on that. People might have different thoughts, but anyways, I was really grateful with what Pastor Sky shared yesterday, because I think we can see from that example, we can see through the action and break down like what in there is the strategy that we can employ. And so with 2G talks and with the future Providence, I hope that we can make things brighter. I know we have some parents like who are new parents who are starting to have kids. So I really wish them luck on this journey, and let's raise these kids together. Let's trust each other. Let's help teach them. Let's help pastor them, right? That was something from growing up that I think is important. Don't muzzle these lambs, and don't like keep them on a leash, but pasture them. Kind of like watch them from the distance, let them experience things too, show them the good example. When they go out into the world and see something that maybe that's not great, you can help them to understand, but don't restrain them from seeing these things. Don't overprotect our kids, but help them to grow within God. Like one of the things that I know that the female SS rep heard from her parents, like when growing up, was that it's okay if you don't like have a good day with me, right? If you get upset with me, but never blame God because of something that I do, right? And that might seem kind of funny, but like what through that process it was making sure that the kid's relationship with God is somewhat separate just from their relationship with people. right? Even if that person or those people are the parents or the siblings, right? I think that's imperative, right? Kids need to learn that through experience, but if we can provide them the education, then hopefully that they can see it from an early age. Sometimes if it doesn't connect, like if they like really see just too big of a discrepancy between life and the lesson that they're learning, it may still be difficult. But I think by showing them the example, by teaching them when, about why and how, and letting them experience it from an early age, that these are three steps that we can take to maximize the success of the future province. So with that, we'll conclude today's episode of the MSC on 117.8. I can't wait to hear from everyone soon. Good luck to the AP team who's, going from Malaysia to Korea or back here. Travel safely, everyone, over the summer or winter, wherever you are. And I hope to see you guys next week on the MSC on 117.8.